French scientists claim they have put an end to conspiracy theories surrounding Adolf Hitler's death.
Of holdouts, Soviet troops move into the bunker, and they confirm not just the fall of the Third Reich, but the death of Adolf Hitler himself.
For over 60 years, a skull fragment preserved in a Moscow archive was presented as the ultimate proof of Adolf Hitler's suicide. It was a grim trophy meant to close one of history's darkest chapters. But in 2009, when a scientific team was granted the rare permission to conduct a DNA test on the relic, the results were completely unexpected and stunning. The analysis revealed that the skull did not belong to Hitler, but to an unidentified woman. This discovery didn't just raise questions, it challenged the established, decades-long narrative surrounding the end of World War II. In April 1945, Berlin was a city in ruins. The once vast Third Reich had shrunk to a fortified bunker deep beneath the Reich Chancellery. As Soviet artillery hammered the city, Adolf Hitler, a man broken by defeat, faced his end. Witnesses described him as a shell of his former self, suffering from paranoia and physical tremors. He spent his final days in pointless meetings, lashing out at generals and issuing orders to armies that no longer existed. With Soviet troops closing in, Hitler made his last arrangements. On April 29th, he dictated his will and married Eva Braun. The following day, they died by suicide together in his private study. In accordance with his wishes, their bodies were taken outside to the Chancellery garden, covered in gasoline, and set on fire in a bomb crater. However, due to constant shelling, the cremation was rushed and incomplete. Days later, Soviet soldiers stormed the area and discovered the partially burned remains. They were quickly transported to Moscow and became the subject of decades of secrecy. This secrecy was amplified by the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin, who publicly fueled rumors that Hitler might have escaped. This deliberate strategy ensured that the truth of Hitler's death would remain clouded in uncertainty for years. The chaotic scene in Berlin, the incomplete cremation, and the Soviets' handling of the evidence created the perfect environment for doubt to grow. While many believed the official story, others speculated that Hitler had secretly fled. The truth seemed lost between eyewitness accounts, political games, and the few bone fragments, a jawbone, some dental work, and a piece of a skull held tightly in Soviet archives. These fragments were the key to both confirming and questioning Hitler's death. But with the Soviets controlling all access, conspiracy theories thrived. Decades later, when scientists were finally able to examine these relics, the results would ignite a new controversy, all centered on one disturbing question. If the skull wasn't Hitler's, whose was it? When Soviet troops stormed the Chancellery a few days later, they discovered the partially burned remains. Understanding the immense political value of this find, they quickly secured the fragments and transported them to Moscow under a shroud of secrecy. This secrecy would define the narrative for decades. While internally, Soviet forensics confirmed the remains belonged to Hitler, Joseph Stalin chose to publicly sow doubt. At the Potsdam Conference in July 1945, he casually suggested to Allied leaders that Hitler might have escaped to Spain or Argentina. This deliberate ambiguity fueled conspiracy theories that persist to this day, keeping the West uneasy and reinforcing Soviet control over the evidence. For years, the remains, a jawbone, dental bridges, and the now famous skull fragment were held in state archives, rarely seen. The skull fragment, in particular, was occasionally displayed as a trophy symbolizing the Soviet victory over Nazism. However, the lack of transparency and refusal to allow international verification meant that doubts about Hitler's death never fully disappeared. The artifacts were treated more like political symbols than forensic evidence, creating a mystery that would take over 60 years to unravel. While the skull fragment became a famous relic, the most compelling proof of Hitler's death has always been his dental remains. Dental work, with its unique fillings and bridges, acts like a forensic fingerprint. The Soviets recovered a jawbone fragment from the garden that contained distinctive and complex dental work. To confirm its identity, they interrogated Hitler's dental assistant, Kata Heusermann, who immediately recognized the jaw as belonging to the Führer. Her identification was based on Hitler's notoriously poor dental health, which required extensive and unusual bridge work that was meticulously documented in his records. This evidence has stood the test of time. In 2018, French forensic specialists were given access to the jawbone and confirmed the original findings. Their modern analysis, which compared the bone to Hitler's X-rays, left no doubt. The dental remains were authentically his. This scientific certainty provided a firm anchor for the historical record, establishing that Hitler did, in fact, die in the bunker. It also provided a crucial baseline of truth that would later be contrasted with the shocking discovery about the skull. For decades, the Soviet Union displayed a bullet-pierced skull fragment as the definitive proof of Hitler's suicide. This relic, kept in Moscow, was shown to the world as the final word on his death. But that all changed in 2009 when Nick Bellantoni, an American archaeologist, was given rare access to examine it. Even before testing, Bellantoni was suspicious. The bone appeared too thin and delicate to belong to a man of Hitler's age. A DNA analysis soon confirmed his doubts with a shocking result. The skull belonged to an unidentified woman, not Hitler. The news made global headlines. The most famous artifact of Hitler's death had been misidentified for over 60 years. This discovery didn't prove Hitler had escaped, but it raised a new question. If the skull wasn't his, whose was it? Speculation suggested it could be Eva Braun's or another victim's from the final battle in Berlin. Amid the media frenzy, forensic experts clarified an important detail. The DNA test only invalidated the skull fragment. Other evidence, particularly a jawbone that perfectly matched Hitler's dental records, still provided conclusive proof that he died in the bunker. In the end, the historical consensus about Hitler's death remained unchanged. However, the controversy served as a powerful reminder of how easily historical evidence can be mistaken and how myths can be built on shaky foundations. It exposed a major error in the record and changed how we view the story of Hitler's final days. So, how could the Soviets have misidentified something as important as Hitler's skull? The answer lies in the chaos of Berlin in 1945, the secrecy of the Soviet state, and the way relics of war can sometimes be treated more as symbols than as scientific evidence. When Soviet soldiers collected the charred remains from a bomb-cratered garden, conditions were far from forensic. With multiple bodies scattered around, it would have been very easy to mix up bone fragments in the confusion. Furthermore, the skull had immense political value for the Soviet Union. It was treated less like scientific evidence and more like a powerful symbol of their victory over Nazism. Once it was labeled as Hitler's, its authenticity was never seriously questioned, as it served as a useful propaganda tool. While it is still unknown who the skull actually belonged to, speculation points to Eva Braun or another victim. Experts stress that this mistake does not change the overall historical conclusion. The truly decisive evidence has always been Hitler's jaw and dental remains, which have been repeatedly verified as a perfect match. Ultimately, the DNA test didn't rewrite history. It corrected a long-standing error. The story serves as a powerful reminder of how easily the truth can be distorted by the fog of war, secrecy, and politics, even when the main facts of history remain unchanged. The 2009 revelation that Hitler's supposed skull belonged to a woman created a media storm, fueling old conspiracy theories that he had escaped. For the public, it seemed like history had been turned upside down. However, historians and forensic experts quickly clarified that the skull fragment was never the primary evidence. The most conclusive proof has always been Hitler's jawbone and dental records, which were a confirmed match, both in 1945 and again in modern tests. The DNA test on the skull exposed a cataloguing mistake, not a story of survival. Still, the incident showed how fragile historical accounts can be. For 60 years, the skull was presented as a definitive relic. The error raised questions about the secrecy surrounding the Soviet evidence, even if the main facts were not in dispute. Today, the historical consensus remains firm. Adolf Hitler died in his Berlin bunker in 1945. The skull controversy is seen as a cautionary tale about how artifacts can be misidentified. The story continues to fascinate us because it proves that history is rarely simple, and even the end of one of history's most infamous figures can be tangled in error and mystery.